New antisemitism is the concept that a new form of antisemitism has developed in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, emanating simultaneously from the far left, radical Islam, and the far right, and tending to manifest itself as opposition to Zionism and the State of Israel. The concept generally posits that much of what purports to be criticism of Israel by various individuals and world bodies is, in fact, tantamount to demonization, and that, together with an alleged international resurgence of attacks on Jews and Jewish symbols, and an increased acceptance of anti-Semitic beliefs in public discourse, such demonization represents an evolution in the appearance of anti-Semitic beliefs. Proponents of the concept argue that anti-Zionism, anti-Americanism, anti-globalization, third worldism, and demonization of Israel, or double standards applied to its conduct, may be linked to anti-Semitism, or constitute disguised antisemitism. Critics of the concept argue that it conflates anti-Zionism with antisemitism, defines legitimate criticism of Israel too narrowly and demonization too broadly, trivializes the meaning of antisemitism, and exploits antisemitism in order to silence political debate. History of the concept. 1960s. Origins. French philosopher Pierre-André Taguieff has argued that the first wave of what he describes as la nouvelle Judeophobie emerged in the Arab Muslim world and the Soviet sphere following the 1967 Six-Day War. Citing papers by Jacques Givet and historian Elia Couto and Polyakov in which the idea of a new antisemitism rooted in anti-Zionism was discussed, he argues that anti-Jewish themes centered on the demonical figures of Israel and what he calls fantasy world Zionism, that Jews plot together, seek to conquer the world, and are imperialistic and bloodthirsty, which gave rise to the reactivation of stories about ritual murder and the poisoning of food and water supplies. 1970s. Early debates. Writing in the American Jewish Congress, a Congress bi-weekly in 1973, the Foreign Minister of Israel, abushaban, identified anti-Zionism as the new anti-Semitism, saying, "Recently we have witnessed the rise of the new left which identifies Israel with the establishment, with acquisition, with smug satisfaction, with, in fact, all the basic enemies. Let there be no mistake. The New Left is the author and the progenitor of the new anti-Semitism. One of the chief tasks of any dialogue with the Gentile world is to prove that the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Anti-Zionism is merely the new anti-Semitism. The old classic anti-Semitism declared that equal rights belong to all individuals within the society, except the Jews. The new anti-Semitism says that the right to establish and maintain an independent national sovereign state is the prerogative of all nations, so long as they happen not to be Jewish. And when this right is exercised not by the Maldives Islands, not by the state of Gabon, not by Barbados, but by the oldest and most authentic of all nationhoods, then this is said to be exclusivism, particularism, and a flight of the Jewish people from its universal mission. In 1974, Arnold Forster and Benjamin Epstein of the Anti-Defamation League published a book entitled The New Anti-Semitism, expressing additional concern about what they described as new manifestations of anti-Semitism coming from radical left, radical right, and pro-Arab figures in the U.S. Forster and Epstein argued that it took the form of indifference to the fears of the Jewish people, apathy in dealing with anti-Jewish bias, and an inability to understand the importance of Israel to Jewish survival. Reviewing Forster and Epstein's work in commentary, Earl Raab, founding director of the Nathan Perlmutter Institute for Jewish Advocacy at Brandeis University, argued that a new anti-Semitism was indeed emerging in America, in the form of opposition to the collective rights of the Jewish people. But he criticized Forster and Epstein for conflating it with anti-Israel bias. Alan Brownfeld writes that Forster and Epstein's new definition of antisemitism trivialized the concept by turning it into a form of political blackmail and a weapon with which to silence any criticism of either Israel or U.S. policy in the Middle East, while Edward S. Shapiro, in A Time for Healing, American Jewry Since World War II, has written that Forster and Epstein implied that the new anti-Semitism was the inability of Gentiles to love Jews and Israel enough. 1980s, present-day political convergence historian Robert Wistrich addressed the issue in a 1984 lecture delivered in the home of Israeli President Chaim Herzog, in which he argued that a new anti-Semitic anti-Zionism was emerging, distinguishing features of which were the equation of Zionism with Nazism and the belief that Zionists had actively collaborated with Nazis during World War II. He argued that such claims were prevalent in the Soviet Union, but added that similar rhetoric had been taken up by a part of the radical left, particularly Trotskyist groups in Western Europe and America.